Dr. Peterson, my husband and I are expecting our first child. Do you have any thoughts on early childhood care for working mothers? Should the mother stay home longer than typical maternity leave allows, even if she is the higher earner in the household, in the interest of healthy psychological development? That's an interesting twist on this when it comes directly to earning, because I think I know what your answer would be if it was...
Well, one question might be, whose psychological development? You know, like, it's a lot harder on mothers to leave their infants and go back to work than they typically think. Like, it's really rough. And, you know, you wonder, too, to what degree, this is speculation, but as a protective mechanism, you know, you don't want to be divorcing yourself in some sense from that intense relationship with your child to soften the blow of having to go back to work. Because, you know, you really have to fall in love with your infant. And this really affects women. It's a big change. It's biochemically mediated to a large degree, for whatever that's worth. But, you know, infants are a tremendous amount of responsibility and trouble because they can't do anything. And you have to be, like, seriously in love with them to do right by them. And then it'll wrench your soul to part too early. And so it's a personal decision, you know, like... And it also depends on the degree to which your partner is maternal, let's say, because some women aren't very maternal. It's a temperamental thing. Some men are more maternal than others. If your partner is capable of providing that maternal care, infants are perfectly capable of forming multiple attachments. What they don't like is to have a primary attachment disrupted, because the person to whom the infant attaches primarily is the infant's entire world. So when that person goes away, their entire world goes away. So they can have multiple close attachments, and so if the father can get in there and have a really tightly bonded attachment, and he can take over the roles. Although I would say, in my personal experience, it's very rare. It's hard for men to do right by infants for the first year. They just don't have the equipment. Yeah. They can do it, but it's not easy. It's
not as built in, basically, because we discussed this a little bit.
Well, they also don't have breasts, which actually turns out to be somewhat of a problem.
Yeah.
Because breastfeeding actually matters, and there's a lot to breastfeeding. It's you know, you think it's just a matter of nutrition. It's not. It's skin-to-skin contact. It's eye-to-eye gaze. It's embodied rhythm. It's the beginnings of the establishment of the relationship. Like, and that isn't to say that you can't bottle feed with success, right? But breastfeeding also tends to produce children who have higher IQs. So that's also worth knowing, because that actually matters.
Yeah, one of the things that I asked you privately a couple weeks ago, because I was saying how you talk about these things often in the terms of sort of male, female.
Yeah.
And I was telling, you know, as you know, I'm gay and married, and my husband is actually much more of a nurturer and would be much better with children than I would want to be in all this. And you were very clear that your position on all of this isn't that it has to be a male and a female, but you were just talking about the traits of masculinity and femininity. And sometimes there are very effeminate men who happen to be straight, and there are very masculine women who happen to be female.
Yes, yes.
Which I just think it's worth mentioning in all this, because I think people accuse you sometimes of somehow you're being, you know, anti-gay or something in all this, and I think
well, I mean, look, there are pronounced personality differences between men and women. Women are higher in negative emotion, and they're higher in trait agreeableness, and it's not small. But there's more difference within women and difference within men than there is between the groups. It's true with almost every group comparison. So there can be significant differences where there's still enough individual variation, so you can't do a good job of categorizing a person as a consequence, say, of their gender. You know, like, basically with the agreeableness, the difference is enough so that if you took random sets of men and women out of the population, and you bet on who was more agreeable. If you bet on the woman, you'd be right 60% of the time. But that's a significant difference. But you'd be wrong 40% of the time. So this is the problem. This is one of the things that the people who criticize James Damore, for example, they just don't get it.
Yeah.
Is that and they also don't get it with their damn diversity arguments. I hate those arguments. Diversity of race and gender makes for diversity of opinion. It's like, you can't have both of those beliefs at the same time.
That's actually prejudice.
No, it's actually wrong, because there's more difference within the groups than there is between them. Otherwise, I don't even want to get started with that. It's so wrong, technically wrong. It's not a matter of political opinion. It's wrong.
Yeah.
There's more difference within people, within groups of people, than there is between them.
No.
Otherwise, we couldn't even communicate.
And I like the passion with which you're saying it, because this is why we know that social justice and the diversity memo and all of this nonsense is going to come into direct conflict with biology.
Oh yeah, the biology.
So that's why your lack of tolerance for it is because you get it.
Well, it's already come into conflict with biology. These aren't, I wouldn't say that these are precisely theories. No one was thrilled about these discoveries. Like, they're hard-nosed, statistically derived, agnostic knowledge statements. It's like, no one knew that when the Scandinavians produced more equitable societies that the personality differences between men and women would get bigger. No one thought that. No one predicted it. No one was happy about it. It just happened. There's nothing political about it. In fact, quite the contrary, because most of the people who discovered this, if you would have asked them what their preferences were, because they'd be more liberal leaning, they would have predicted, hey, well, if you make societies more equitable, men and women are going to get more the same, obviously, because it seems obvious. And yes, that would be a good thing. It's like, well, obvious or not, it was wrong. And it's reliable because the people who discovered it wouldn't have wanted it that way. They weren't conservatives saying, oh, well, we have to sustain the difference between men and women. It was like, oh my God, that happened? We better replicate that because it seems unlikely. Well, it took a long time even for people to figure out how that could possibly be the case. The answer was, well, men and women differ for two reasons: environmental and genetic. If you take all the differences out of the environment, all you're left with is the genetic differences. They maximize. It's like, oh, that makes sense. We didn't predict it. We wouldn't have guessed it. But how else could it be? Well, it could be that there were no genetic differences. Well,
right.
The fact that women have like functioning breasts and men don't, that's actually a genetic difference. There are genetic differences. So
the hate speech never ends with you, huh?
Yeah, I know.
It's just
like,
endless.
it's one
All right.
thing after another.